In 1609, Henry Hudson sailed into what would later become New York Harbor aboard the Halve Maen under the commission of the Dutch East India Company. His mission was ambitious. He sought a passage to Asia that would allow trade with the East Indies. He carried hope, charts, and the expectations of a powerful trading company. Yet, despite his careful navigation, he did not find the passage he sought. The goal of his voyage went unfulfilled, at least in the sense of discovering a new route to Asia. But the harbor itself made a different kind of discovery possible. Hudson's ship entered safely, a remarkable feat for the time. Many explorers before him had struggled to find harbors along the Atlantic coast. Shallow mouths, hidden sandbars, and narrow channels often blocked access, forcing ships to anchor offshore or risk running aground. Here, however, Hudson's vessel found deep water and calm entry. The natural conditions of the harbor allowed a ship of significant size to approach without danger. Encouraged, Hudson sailed upriver, moving further inland than most European explorers had dared. The river, which now bears his name, did not resist him. It opened wide, carried him northward, and promised passage deep into the continent. He moved past marshes, forests, and small streams joining the main channel. For weeks, the river accommodated his large vessel, proving that this was no ordinary waterway. This was unusual. Across the Atlantic coast, rivers often became shallow quickly or split into narrow, winding channels unsuitable for ships. Hudson's experience revealed something unique. The river connected directly to the interior, offering a natural highway for trade and travel. When Hudson finally reached the point where the river narrowed and turned inland beyond navigation, he turned back. He had not found the route to Asia, but he had discovered another truth. This river reached far into the continent and could carry large ships for miles. The implications were immediately noticed by the Dutch. While Hudson's voyage had not produced the shortcut to Asia, it revealed a location where trade could thrive. The combination of a deep, sheltered harbor and a river flowing far inland promised a strategic advantage for any trading power. This set the stage for a decisive turning point. The Dutch were not primarily seeking farmland. They were traders, focused on access, routes, and commerce. In 1624, they established the colony of New Netherland, placing its center precisely at the harbor Hudson had explored. The choice of location was deliberate. They did not settle Manhattan for beauty or climate. They settled it because it provided movement. Ships could arrive from Europe, dock safely, and unload cargo. The river allowed goods to flow inland efficiently. Furs from the forests of New York and beyond could be exported. Tools, textiles, and manufactured items could be brought in. This system worked without roads, without major infrastructure. Water did the work. Trade moved naturally along these paths. What comes next illustrates why this mattered more than leadership. Success in New Netherland did not depend solely on the plans of governors or the ambitions of settlers. Geography dictated the patterns of commerce, the flow of goods, and the choice of merchants. People followed opportunity. Ships arrived where the harbor allowed, and trade thrived where the river could carry it inland. Hudson's voyage had revealed not only a safe harbor and navigable river, but also the framework for a commercial network that would shape the colony and eventually the city for centuries to come. The Dutch did not build a great city at first. New Amsterdam remained small, with only a few hundred residents scattered along the waterfront. Its population was limited, its defenses weak, and its roads rudimentary. By human measures, the settlement should have failed. Yet trade persisted. Ships continued to arrive. Merchants continued to conduct business. Why did New Amsterdam survive when it seemed so fragile? The answer was not leadership. It was not ambition. It was the harbor itself. Ships preferred this sheltered water. Merchants preferred the Hudson River for its inland reach. Geography reduced risk in a way that no governor, no law, and no human decision could replicate. Other ports tried to compete. Boston had established people. Philadelphia had careful planning. Charleston had wealth and plantations by the early 1700s. Each of these cities wanted to become the main gateway to the interior of the continent. Each believed that people, planning, and policy could determine that future. Geography, however, had the final word. The Atlantic coastline was harsh. Storms destroyed ports up and down the coast. Sandbars shifted overnight. Channels silted up and closed. Ice immobilized northern ports for months at a time. New York Harbor, however, remained open. Its waters thawed sooner. Ships could anchor safely, repair damage, and continue their voyages. Trade gravitated naturally to this safety. No law forced it. No edict commanded it. Water alone persuaded them. This is where the central theme sharpens. People made decisions, yes, but geography made them easier. In 1664, the English seized New Amsterdam and renamed New York. Such political changes might have altered the city's fortunes, yet trade continued without pause. Shipping routes stayed the same. Vessels still arrived in the harbor. Flags changed, governments shifted, but the depth, protection, and accessibility of the harbor remained constant. This is the quiet power of place, enduring, immovable, and decisive. A lesser-known fact illustrates this point. British officials debated whether trade should move to other ports. Some favored Boston, others wanted ports farther south. But merchants resisted these suggestions. They had learned the value of New York Harbor through experience, through risk and reward, through seasons of ice and storms. Cargo moved more cheaply here. Loss rates were lower. Turnaround times were faster. These advantages were undeniable, built on the natural environment, not human decree. By the early 1700s, New York grew organically, without a grand plan. Warehouses appeared along the waterfront. Docks extended farther into the water. The harbor itself allowed expansion without strain. Other cities required constant repair and adjustment to natural obstacles. New York, however, expanded along paths that water had already prepared. Behind the harbor, the land opened westward. Rivers connected to lakes. Trade corridors formed naturally. People followed the paths that water had dictated. What happens when geography confers advantage before people fully understand it? The answer shaped the next century. Power accumulated not through vision or design, but through gravity. Trade pulled people in. Labor and settlement followed trade. No single leader created this growth. No master plan laid the foundation. The harbor did. It dictated where commerce flowed, where people settled, and how a small colonial outpost became a preeminent city. By 1700, the British colonies along the Atlantic coast were growing rapidly. Boston had deep roots and a network of strong merchants. Philadelphia, founded in 1682, expanded with careful planning, attracting settlers and trade. Charleston thrived on plantation exports, especially rice and indigo, by the early 1700s. Each of these cities wanted to become the main gateway to the interior of the continent. Each believed that people, planning, and policy could determine that future. Geography, however, had the final word. Boston's harbor was strong and well protected. It had early shipbuilding and established trade networks. By 1700, Boston was already a major port, connecting merchants to Europe and the Caribbean. Yet the city faced serious limits. Its rivers were short and shallow, restricting inland movement. Winter ice closed routes for long periods, further limiting trade. Ships could send goods outward efficiently, but moving trade deep into the continent was far more difficult. As inland demand for supplies and exports grew, this limitation became increasingly significant. Philadelphia initially appeared more promising. William Penn's carefully planned city sat along the Delaware River, which provided access inland. By the early 1700s, Philadelphia's population and trade rivaled that of New York. But the river had its constraints. As it moved inland, it narrowed and became shallow in sections. Large ships could not navigate far upriver. Cargo had to be transferred to smaller boats or unloaded onto wagons. This added both cost and time and increased the risk of damage. Merchants quickly noticed the inefficiency. New York Harbor did not face these challenges. Its advantages were already well known to those who traded there. Ships entered easily. They docked safely. Goods moved directly to and from the interior without major obstacles. By 1720, trade records showed New York handling steadily increasing volumes of grain, timber, and imported goods. The growth was not dramatic, but it was consistent. And in commerce, steady growth can be harder to stop than sudden bursts of success. A new challenge, however, was emerging. The interior of North America was opening rapidly. Farms expanded westward, and demand for tools, cloth, and salt increased. The question became simple. Which port could best serve this growing interior? The answer depended not on ambition or politics alone, but on the routes available for moving goods efficiently. From New York Harbor, the Hudson River flowed north, reaching deep into what is now upstate New York. Short land crossings connected it to other waterways further west. This mattered immensely. By the early 1700s, traders were already using portage routes between the Hudson and rivers flowing westward. Goods moved from ships to riverboats and then to inland settlements, creating a natural corridor that no other Atlantic port could match. It was not yet a complete system, but the pathway existed. Geography had drawn it first, long before human plans could follow. Other cities tried to compete. During the 1720s and 1730s, colonial governments invested in roads, improved wagons, and encouraged inland markets. They sought to make overland trade more efficient, but the reality was harsh. Roads were slow. They broke down in heavy use. They froze in winter. They flooded in spring. Water, by contrast, remained faster, safer, and cheaper. This was not theory. Merchants tracked costs meticulously. They followed routes that minimized expense and risk. Those routes repeatedly led back to New York Harbor. A lesser-known fact from this period is that not everyone welcomed this growth. Dock workers faced instability as trade volumes shifted. Small merchants feared being squeezed by larger competitors. Colonial officials worried about maintaining control over a bustling port. Yet commerce moved forward without anyone's permission. The harbor did not wait for consensus. Its natural advantages guided trade, independent of human approval. By 1750, New York had become a central exchange point. Goods from the Caribbean passed through its docks. European imports moved inland. Colonial exports flowed outward, gathering at the harbor. The city still lacked strong industry and had no political dominance, yet trade continued to choose New York. Observers at the time were puzzled. How could a relatively small, politically weak city dominate commerce? The answer lay in geography. The 7 Years' War, beginning in 1756, reshaped North America. Control of inland routes became urgent. Fortified paths mattered. Supply lines mattered. Once again, geography spoke. British forces relied on the Hudson River as a strategic corridor during the war. It allowed them to move troops and supplies efficiently. French forces sought to cut this route, fully understanding its value. The river connected New York Harbor to the interior battlefield. This was no accident. Military planners followed the same paths merchants had used for decades, paths that had been shaped by the natural landscape. The war ended in 1763 with British victory. France lost much of its North American territory. This outcome opened vast new lands to settlement and trade. Farmers moved westward, carrying goods and seeking markets. Ports became essential, and New York Harbor stood ready to serve them. Its depth, protection, and river access made it the obvious choice. Tension, however, followed. In the 1760s, the British government imposed taxes and trade controls, including the Stamp Act of 1765, disrupting commerce. Merchants protested, and ships delayed departure. Still, the harbor remained active. Even under strain, it outperformed rival ports. Why? Because alternatives were worse. Boston, Philadelphia, and Charleston could not match the combination of depth, safety, and inland access. Geography had made the decision for them. When resistance escalated into revolution in 1775, New York became a prize. Both British and American forces recognized its value. The British captured the city in 1776 and held it for most of the war. Their control was not merely symbolic, it protected the harbor and the vital supply routes that flowed from it. No other port offered the same strategic reach. The war disrupted trade across the colonies, yet New York recovered quickly. When the conflict ended in 1783, merchants returned. The harbor remained unchanged. The river still flowed. Geography survived the chaos. By the late 1780s, the young United States faced a critical decision: how to connect its growing interior to global trade. Roads had proven unreliable. Rivers worked. Among them, the Hudson stood out. Its connection to the harbor created a natural corridor that no other city could match. The harbor waited silently, offering its advantages to whoever could take full advantage. The problem was clear, and the solution would soon emerge. By the late 18th century, New York Harbor had already proven its advantages. Ships preferred its safety, and merchants trusted its depth. The city grew steadily, but the interior of the continent remained difficult to reach. Roads were slow, overland transport was costly, and rivers did not always connect in ways that facilitated commerce. Trade was still constrained by geography, ironically, even as the harbor itself offered such natural promise. The idea of a canal connecting the Hudson River to the Great Lakes began to take shape in the 1780s and 1790s. Merchants and local politicians recognized the potential of linking New York City directly to inland settlements in upstate New York and beyond. Such a waterway would allow goods from western farms to flow straight to the harbor, bypassing slow overland transport. At first, the concept seemed almost impossible. The land was rugged, rivers were separate. Constructing a waterway across hundreds of miles of forest, swamps, and hills appeared daunting. Skeptics doubted that it could ever be completed. By 1808, however, engineers and planners were seriously studying a viable route. Surveyors mapped the Mohawk River Valley, looking for paths that could connect it to the Hudson. Local governments debated costs. Investors hesitated. Yet merchants continued to press the idea. They understood that geography had already chosen New York Harbor as the main gateway, but the harbor's reach had not yet extended deep into the continent. A canal would dramatically change that equation. Construction of the Erie Canal began in 1817, stretching more than 360 miles from Albany on the Hudson River to Buffalo on Lake Erie. The canal was one of the greatest engineering feats of its time. Builders faced enormous challenges. Locks had to be constructed to manage elevation changes. Swamps were drained and hills were cut through. Yet laborers worked with remarkable precision and determination. By 1825, the canal was completed, and the first ship traversed the full route on October 26, 1825. Suddenly, New York Harbor had direct access to the interior of the continent. The effects were immediate and transformative. Trade shifted decisively to New York. Farmers in the Midwest could ship grain and other goods directly to the harbor. Merchants in the city could distribute imports and supplies to inland settlements faster than competitors in Boston or Philadelphia. The harbor's natural advantages, already significant, were now amplified by human engineering. Geography provided safety and access. The canal provided reach and efficiency. The canal's success reshaped the city itself. By the 1830s, New York had become the largest city in the United States. Immigrants arrived in increasing numbers, seeking work in shipping, warehousing, and trade. Merchants and laborers settled near the waterfront. Warehouses expanded along the docks. The city's growth was no longer merely a response to trade, it became a driver of trade. New York's population and commercial power fed one another in a self-reinforcing cycle. Yet tensions remained. Rival cities attempted to compete. Philadelphia tried to improve navigation along the Delaware River. Boston invested in canals and early railroads. None of these efforts could match the combination of a naturally deep harbor, Hudson River access, and Erie Canal reach. New York's geographic advantage, now compounded by infrastructure, was almost impossible to surpass. Dominance was nearly inevitable. A lesser-known fact is that the Erie Canal also shaped politics. Cities and towns along its route gained influence. New York State gained financial power through tolls and trade taxes. The harbor became more than a port, it became the center of economic and political gravity. Merchants understood this. Ship owners understood this. Even governments recognized it. Geography had been the first advantage, setting the stage for growth. Engineering magnified it, extending the city's reach far beyond what nature alone had provided. By the mid-19th century, New York Harbor had become the beating heart of American commerce. The Erie Canal, completed in 1825, had linked the harbor directly to the interior, opening a new era of trade. Ships poured in from Europe, carrying manufactured goods, textiles, and luxury items. Goods flowed out to inland towns and farms, connecting distant communities to global markets. The city grew faster than anyone had predicted. But what comes next is the story of success testing its limits. The harbor's natural advantages remained unmatched, yet the sheer volume of trade and people created challenges no one had fully anticipated. By the 1840s, shipping traffic had increased dramatically. Sailing ships, sloops, brigs, and steamships crowded the harbor. Dock space became limited, and warehouses were overwhelmed by incoming cargo. Captains sometimes waited days or even weeks to unload their goods. Merchants lost money as delays mounted. Perishable cargoes spoiled. Frustration grew across the waterfront. The harbor, once an effortless conduit for trade, was under pressure. Its natural advantage, depth, protection, and river access, was being tested by human activity. City planners and engineers faced a serious dilemma. How could the harbor accommodate rapid growth without losing its edge? One solution was the expansion of piers. Wooden piers were extended further into the water. New wharves were constructed along Manhattan's waterfront, each designed to handle specific types of cargo. By 1850, the North River, what we now call the Hudson River waterfront, had dozens of piers. Each pier was specialized: grain, timber, sugar, cotton, coffee. Yet even with this expansion, congestion remained a problem. Ships waited in lines stretching across the harbor, competing for limited space, and the flow of trade slowed despite the harbor's natural advantages. Steamships added a new layer of complexity. Before the 1830s, most vessels relied on wind power. Sail-powered ships moved slowly and predictably, giving dock workers time to adjust. Steamships, however, were faster, larger, and less dependent on weather. By the 1840s, steamships regularly sailed from New York to Europe, carrying larger cargoes and requiring more organized docking facilities. The harbor's natural depth helped accommodate these vessels, but human planning had to catch up. Dock layouts, traffic management, and cargo handling all needed new systems to match the increasing scale of commerce. Railroads entered the picture in the mid-19th century, further transforming New York Harbor into a national trade hub. By the 1840s, the city was connected by rail to nearby towns and regions. Tracks ran from the docks directly to warehouses, allowing goods to move inland without waiting for canal boats or river transport. Railroads like the New York and Erie Railroad, chartered in 1832, completed to Lake Erie by 1851, and the Hudson River Railroad, chartered in 1846, completed 1851, allowed grain, timber, coal, and manufactured goods to move faster and more reliably than ever before. The combination of ships, canal traffic via the Erie Canal, and trains increased trade volumes exponentially, but it also created new logistical headaches. Coordinating ships, barges, and trains became essential. Scheduling errors could mean delays of days, congested docks, and financial losses for merchants. Population growth added yet another layer of complexity. Immigration exploded during the 1840s and 1850s, particularly from Ireland and Germany, as famine and political unrest drove people to the United States. By 1850, New York City's population had exceeded 500,000, making it the largest city in the country. By 1860, it surpassed 800,000. Workers crowded the waterfront, filling docks, piers, and warehouses. Housing was limited, and factories and workshops sprouted along narrow streets near the docks. The harbor, which had once functioned smoothly under modest traffic, now faced constant human pressure. Labor disputes, congestion, and competition for dock space became common. City officials experimented with solutions to manage this chaos. Dock regulations assigned specific piers for certain types of cargo. Sugar, cotton, timber, and grain each had dedicated spaces. Custom houses monitored cargo and collected tariffs efficiently, a system critical since New York had become the nation's primary port. Harbor pilots and dockmasters coordinated ships according to tides and schedules to avoid collisions. Yet accidents continued. Fire was a constant threat given the wooden piers, crowded warehouses, and flammable goods stored in bulk. In 1845, a massive fire along the East River destroyed several piers and warehouses, causing losses estimated in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, a catastrophic sum at the time. This event highlighted that even the most geographically advantaged harbor remained vulnerable when human pressures were high. Despite these challenges, geography continued to matter most. Other major ports could not match New York's combination of natural depth, protection from storms, and access to inland rivers. Boston faced shallow waters and harsh winter ice. Philadelphia's Delaware River was narrow and difficult for large vessels to navigate. Baltimore's harbor had limited space and treacherous shoals. New York's harbor, by contrast, allowed ships of virtually any size to enter safely and dock efficiently. Its advantages were too strong to ignore, even under the stress of growing traffic and occasional disaster. A lesser-known fact from this period involved the harbor's tidal influence. Engineers and pilots realized that natural tides could assist docking and cargo handling. At high tide, ships could enter piers that were otherwise too shallow. At low tide, cargo could be offloaded more easily onto smaller boats or temporary platforms. This knowledge, once ignored, became a key tool for managing congestion and maintaining the harbor's efficiency without the need for constant construction. By the 1860s, the Civil War introduced new pressures on New York Harbor. The Union relied heavily on the port to ship troops, supplies, and military materials. Ships carrying uniforms, ammunition, food, and medical equipment poured into the harbor. Congestion became a national concern, with the flow of essential goods sometimes slowed by the sheer volume of traffic. Military logistics forced improvements in scheduling, dock management, and navigation. Even during wartime, New York Harbor's natural depth, sheltered waters, and connection to inland rivers allowed it to function efficiently, while other ports along the Atlantic coast struggled with ice, storms, or shallow channels. Geography once again proved decisive, enabling commerce and military supply to coexist in a single strategically vital harbor. Immigration fueled much of New York Harbor's explosive growth in the late 19th century. Between 1880 and 1900, over 2 million immigrants arrived in New York City, many passing directly through the harbor at Ellis Island and nearby piers. The docks became both a workplace and a gateway to America. Longshoremen, warehouse workers, and shipbuilders formed a labor force capable of moving massive quantities of cargo day after day. The harbor's natural depth allowed ships too large to dock elsewhere to arrive safely, while sheltered waters enabled smooth unloading despite high traffic. Even with thousands of people crowding the piers, the harbor could absorb immense volumes of vessels. Geography provided a flexibility that no competitor could match, sustaining trade under pressures that would have overwhelmed other ports. Industrial expansion transformed the waterfront in profound ways. By the 1870s, wooden piers were gradually replaced with durable structures made of stone, iron, and steel. Steam-powered machinery allowed faster unloading of goods. Cranes lifted cargo directly from ships into warehouses, minimizing human labor and delay. The harbor was no longer a passive geographic advantage, it became a fully engineered space. Yet the success of this transformation still depended on natural features. Deep channels, sheltered bays, and the calm waters of the Hudson River remained essential. Engineers built on the harbor's natural strengths, extending its advantages rather than replacing them. Railroads and elevated tracks were now fully integrated into the waterfront infrastructure. By the 1880s, tracks connected directly to docks, enabling cargo to move from ships to trains without long delays or storage bottlenecks. By 1885, rail connections along the East River and the West Side allowed goods to reach New Jersey, upstate New York, and beyond. This integration of harbor, rail, and labor created an efficiency unmatched anywhere else in the United States. Boston and Philadelphia, though established ports, could not replicate this combination of natural depth, storm protection, and access to inland routes. Geography had given New York its initial edge. Human engineering and industrial innovation magnified it into dominance. Port congestion remained a persistent challenge. By 1890, some piers handled hundreds of ships per month. Delays were frequent, and shipping schedules had to be coordinated carefully to prevent collisions or accidents. Yet the harbor's design allowed for continuous expansion. Engineers dredged new channels, rebuilt older piers in concrete, and incorporated mechanical aids to improve flow. Tides and currents, once unpredictable, were carefully managed through knowledge and technology. Even under immense pressure, the harbor's natural advantages proved resilient, absorbing growth that would have crushed other ports and cementing New York's position as the nation's primary gateway for global commerce. Immigrant labor played a critical role in sustaining the operations of New York Harbor in the late 19th century. Dock workers, many from Ireland, Italy, and Germany, moved cargo with remarkable speed and precision. Long hours, harsh working conditions, and intense physical strain were common, yet these laborers ensured that ships were loaded and unloaded efficiently. Without their effort, the harbor's natural advantages, deep channels, sheltered waters, and river access would not have been enough to maintain New York's commercial lead. This reality underscores an important lesson. Geography sets the stage, but human labor executes the play. The harbor's success was a partnership between natural features and human effort. By the late 19th century, New York Harbor had become central to international trade. European ships regularly arrived carrying manufactured goods, while American exports, grain, cotton, lumber, and processed products flowed outward to global markets. The port handled a volume unmatched by any other North American harbor. Records from 1895 indicate that shipping losses in New York were lower than in many rival cities, thanks to its natural depth, sheltered bays, and navigable channels. Merchants preferred New York even when competing ports offered incentives, demonstrating that reliability, safety, and geographic advantage often outweighed financial enticements. Industrial growth during this period also spurred technological innovation along the waterfront. Steam-powered tugs assisted in maneuvering larger vessels, while specialized machinery enabled bulk cargo handling and faster turnaround times. Harbor pilots became indispensable experts, guiding ships through channels, currents, and tides that could otherwise pose significant hazards. Each advancement relied on geography as a foundation. The city could engineer improvements, but the natural features of the harbor dictated the limits of what was possible. Human ingenuity extended its capabilities, but the water remained the ultimate arbiter. By 1900, New York Harbor had firmly established itself as the nation's premier port. It handled more cargo than all other American ports combined, a testament to both its natural advantages and the labor and innovation of its people. The combination of deep waters, sheltered bays, river access, engineered piers, and integrated rail connections was unmatched. Through wars, floods, fires, and waves of immigrants, the harbor's advantage endured. Geography provided the constant, human ingenuity amplified it. New York Harbor was more than a city asset, it was the foundation of a nation's trade. Its influence reached far beyond the waterfront, shaping commerce, immigration, and industry throughout the United States. The harbor's success illustrated a larger truth. While human action could expand and organize it, the power of place was enduring. The next chapter will explore how the harbor shaped New York's global reach and its influence in the early 20th century. From canals to railroads, from immigrant labor to international trade, the story continues. Geography gave the city power, human action built on it, and the world began to notice.